This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Nigeria starts repatriating its citizens from abroad as the world continues to battle the COVID-19 pandemic. The United Nations warns that some governments are using COVID-19 emergency powers to stifle dissent. And spinning for COVID-19 relief, South African DJ raises funds for the hungry. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live here on CGTN. I'm Mahia Mutua in Nairobi. Also coming up this hour, in business, Zimbabwe's Reserve Bank to introduce a new set of higher denomination banknotes. And in sports, Tokyo Games Organizing Committee not sure how money from the IOC will be used. We begin this newscast with a look at what's happening in Africa as the virus continues to spread on the continent. There are now more than 78,000 confirmed cases of coronavirus and over 29,000 recoveries across Africa. The death toll stands at over 2,600. South Africa has the highest number of infections on the continent with over 13,000 confirmed cases. 247 people have died in the country and over 6,000 have recovered. Egypt is following closely with 11,228 cases. 592 reported deaths and over 2,000 recoveries. Cases in Morocco are gradually rising. The country has more than 6,000 confirmed cases and 190 deaths recorded. More than 3,000 patients have recovered in the North African nation. Well, Nigeria has started repatriating its citizens from abroad as the world continues to battle the COVID-19 pandemic. Several hotels in the country have been designated as centers where the returnees will observe 14 days mandatory self-quarantine upon their arrival. Kelechi Emekalam has the details.
When the Ethiopian airline flight carrying over 150 passengers from the U.S. touched down, it marked the end of a long wait to get back home for some of the passengers. Many of them had been stuck after authorities banned all local and international flights due to the coronavirus pandemic. But the Nigerian government has created a window for them to return home, provided they follow proper health and safety guidelines.
The port health were able to go and test their temperature and issue them with the contact. Then, as they descend the aircraft, NCDC staff were on ground to issue them testing kits. 8 buses were on ground for these things, and they have successfully evacuated the passengers to town for further processing.
So far, over 800 returnees are back home from the US, UK, and the UAE. Many more are still expected.
On one hand, I think it's a very, very good thing because now is the time with the advent of the pandemic that people need to be with their families, So a lot of people are stranded outside Nigeria. Some people travel for business, some travel just for something for a very short period, and then the pandemic met them at that time with lockdowns in those countries. So it's good that Nigerian government have been optimistic.
The government is partnering with some top hotels where the returnees would stay and observe the mandatory self-isolation for 14 days. It's a decision that's got many worried.
Nigeria is dealing with the virus in a very, very terrible way already. There are lack of testing kits, there are lack of isolation centers, although everyday new ones are springing up. So that obviously begins to beg a bit of concern that a lot of more people are coming from high-risk countries. I really think a lot of measures need to be taken in order to douse whatever concerns that people might have. First of all, these hotels already have staff. They already have an existing system. Now, you're bringing people in to isolate them. What happens if they now test positive? Do you have measures in place to, to turn that isolation to a quarantine?
A possible link between COVID-19 and a rare inflammatory illness in children. Several countries have reported cases in recent weeks.
Reports from Europe and North America have described a small number of children being admitted to intensive care units with a multi-system inflammatory condition with some features similar to Kawasaki's disease and toxic shock syndrome. Initial reports hypothesize that this syndrome may be related to COVID-19. It's critical to urgently and carefully characterize this clinical syndrome, to understand causality and to describe treatment interventions.
Now, China has donated medical supplies to Tanzania. The Asian giant is helping the East African nation to curb the spread of the coronavirus. The medical supplies are aimed at ensuring frontline health workers are well protected while serving COVID-19 patients. The Chinese ambassador to Tanzania has handed over the medical supplies to the government in Dar es Salaam.
On behalf of the Chinese government, I'm here to hand over the China official assistance of anti-COVID-19 medical supplies to the government of Tanzania. These donations include 2,000 N95 protective masks for medical use, 10,000 surgical masks, 10,000 surgical gloves, 10,000 medical isolation shoe covers, 2,000 pieces of protective clothing, 2,000 medical protective goggles, and 500 infrared.
Sana kwa serikali ya China.
We thank a lot the Chinese government for the protective equipment against COVID-19 to our health workers in hospitals. They are important equipment and we will use them carefully so that to help our people who have infections.
Well, as South Africa continues to use a national lockdown as the key strategy to manage the fight against the coronavirus, the country's health minister has announced a tactical change in direction. Angelo Coppola has more.
Health Minister Zweli Nkize says they are now focusing on targeted management in so-called hotspots, where large numbers of people become infected at the same time. Permanent teams of health specialists will be deployed to do wall-to-wall scanning of the area to make sure infected people are isolated and treated.
For now, infections are mostly concentrated in a few metropolitan municipalities and districts in our country. It is important that we maintain stringent restrictions in those areas and restrict travel out of these areas to other parts of the country with lower rates of infection.
While the focus remains on flattening the infection rate curve and isolating communities, the impact on families across the country has been huge.
Large numbers of people either have no work or work that provides no social protection, and those who work in the informal economy, if they can't go and occupy a strip of road to sell something or operate a small business, they literally have no access to income. And the lockdown has basically put large numbers of people in a position of a very horrendous kind of dilemma. They either go out, they either leave their home and put themselves and their families at risk, or they stay at home and they starve.
The government says it's doing its best to assist those most in need. But there's a group of people who fall outside the wider social grant system. Those who are currently unemployed because they can't look for work or because their employers' businesses are closed.
They don't give us papers. They say we are not qualified. So we don't know. We are not working. We are not getting anything. I'm 57 years. I'm not earning anything. I'm here at home.
I am in need. I'm a mother of 5, a single parent of 5 kids. And I'm currently unemployed because of I work as an independent contractor, but now due to lockdown, definitely I'm not working, and I do not qualify for the UIF as well. So it means I am in need because I've got 5 kids.
The government has unveiled a $27 billion relief package. A portion of that will go to the poor via an unemployment grant.
So there's a problem of adequacy. The 350 Rand is not really enough. 2, there are concerns about how effectively and efficiently it will be administered. Thirdly, is the exclusion of certain groups, and in particular the exclusion of foreign nationals.
With record unemployment levels at 27% before the lockdown, people's lives have gotten worse. They're more unemployed now. And that's seen in the 3.9 million people that have applied for that special grant that's being offered by the government. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Concerns are mounting over how a future vaccine will be shared and who would get it first. French pharmaceutical giant Sanofi came under fire this week after saying the U.S. would have priority. CGTN's Nicole Ang has the story.
The race for a vaccine is ramping up. Scientists around the world are working on over 90 different projects, all with one goal in mind. But the question that emerged this week, when we get a vaccine, how will it be distributed? French company Sanofi days ago said the US would get first dibs, being one of the largest investors in its research. The statement sparked outrage, forcing CEO Paul Hudson to backtrack on the claim.
And we'll try and make more than enough for everybody. And of course, the other companies will too. But I'm, deeply sorry that there's been such a debate locally.
But the apology has not quelled fears that countries will put their own interests first. On Thursday, over 140 world leaders signed a letter calling for any vaccine to be treated as a public good. The letter warns against monopolies, crude competition and nearsighted nationalism. The WHO has echoed the call for equal access.
They will not end the pandemic if we cannot ensure equitable access to them.
US President Donald Trump says his country is working alongside others to develop a vaccine.
So we're working together with many different countries. And again, we have no ego. We have no ego. Whoever gets it, we think it's great. We're going to work
But there are doubts over whether Trump's America First policy could stand in the way. Last month, France and Germany both accused the US of hijacking orders of medical supplies. Berlin authorities claimed a shipment of 200,000 surgical masks was confiscated and diverted to the US. The accusations came as Trump announced a ban on the export of ventilators, masks and other equipment.
We need these items immediately for domestic use. We have to have them.
In March, German media reported the Trump administration had tried to secure exclusive rights to a vaccine by German pharmaceutical company CureVac. The company denied the report, but its former CEO did meet with the White House earlier that month. This week, The Guardian reported that Washington had refused to participate in an EU fundraising event and that it won't be attending a vaccine summit to be held in the UK next month. Regardless, Trump today says he hopes a vaccine will be ready by the end of the year. His advisor says hundreds of millions of doses may be available. The question is where those doses will end up and whether the rest of the world will have a share in it. Nicole Ng, CGTN.
U.S. President Donald Trump has repeatedly blamed China for the pandemic, triggering a backlash against the Asian American community there. Some are hitting back at his comments. Gu Tiangchi has the story.
An article called Mr. President, You Don't Speak for Asian Americans criticizes President Donald Trump. Written by Jeff Young, a contributor to CNN Opinion. The piece outlines what many Asian Americans think of Trump's behavior and claims about the Asian community. Young writes that Trump's comments are a reminder that the status of Asian Americans has been deeply endangered by the president's rhetoric and policies. The U.S. president came under fire on Monday when he abruptly ended a White House press briefing after an Asian American journalist questioned him about whether he views coronavirus testing as a global competition.
Well, they're losing their lives everywhere in the world, and maybe that's a question you should ask China. Don't ask me, ask China that question, okay? When you ask them that question, you may get a very unusual answer. Yes, behind you, please.
Sir, why are you saying that to me specifically?
I'm telling you, I'm not saying it specifically to anybody. I'm saying it to anybody that would ask a nasty question like that.
That's not a nasty question.
Please go ahead.
And later, Trump tried to claim that he knew how Asian Americans are feeling during the pandemic. He tweeted that Asian Americans are very angry at what China has done to the U.S. and the world. But some in the community say they're not upset with China, but are instead angry at Trump and his chaotic and uncoordinated response to COVID-19. Asian American actor Daniel Wu refuted Trump's tweet. His comment saying, "You don't speak for us," gained tens of thousands of likes. And as CNN commentator Jeff Young wrote in his article, he is most angry at Trump's claims that he knows or cares how the Asian American community feels. Meanwhile, U.S. politician Grace Meng has confronted some U.S. officials' repeated use of the term Chinese virus to describe COVID-19. She's worried this anti-Asian rhetoric could threaten the safety of the Asian American community. As the world continues to fight the coronavirus, many have raised concerns that Trump's comments about Asians may influence the community in the U.S. and cast a shadow over those on the front line battling the virus. 苟天启 CGTN.
And staying with that story, American civil rights organizations have registered a surge in attacks on Asian Americans in recent months. Some say the government's rhetoric may have played a role. Edis Tiansan reports from Los Angeles.
This is the moment of a racial attack on a Los Angeles subway train in February. It's a Saturday night. The perpetrator appears intoxicated as he goes on an insulting spree, blaming Chinese people for the coronavirus.
These Chinese people are crazy.
Although she's not Chinese, Tanny says she was the victim of this attack and captured the incident on her phone. The vulgar rant went on for about 10 minutes.
His body language was really moving towards me, and his words were becoming more hateful. And he was saying things like, they're dirty, they don't clean themselves. He used more vile words.
She later shared her story on social media, and it was picked up by national news outlets.
When I started looking around the train, and I was trying to deliberately make eye contact with specifically the men on the train. What I wanted to see was that somebody had my back. Nobody looked at me. Everybody diverted their gaze away from me.
Tanny is among many Asian Americans who say they've experienced similar racial attacks in the United States. The World Health Organization has repeatedly warned against the use of phrases that could lead to the stigmatization of certain ethnic groups. But analysts say political rhetoric hasn't helped.
Certainly, we see the impact that it has had on the Asian American community. I think there have been many challenges and pushbacks to that, and yet there seems to be deliberate choices in the terminology that is used, calling it the Wuhan virus, the Chinese virus.
The current trend of rising incidents of hate speech has become a major concern for Dr. Gay Yuan, who's part of the Chinese American Citizens Alliance in Los Angeles.
It is something that is very unnerving for me, even having lived through it. So many cycles of it. And especially nowadays, crazy people out in the streets spewing hateful messages and doing hateful acts. Then it's very easy to do it with a gun. And that scares the heck out of me.
Yuan says she's witnessed many cycles of racial discrimination against the Asian community. And for those who are now living under the cloud of COVID, speaking up may be the way to prevent these attacks from happening again. It is Tianshan, CGTN, Los Angeles.
Right, well, let's get you some breaking news that is just reaching us. Rwanda genocide suspect Félicien Kabuga has been arrested in France. The French Justice Ministry says Kabuga was living under a false identity in a flat in Paris. The arrest brings to an end a 25-year manhunt for the 84-year-old suspect. Kabuga is Rwanda's most wanted man, and the United States has put a $5 million bounty on his head. The Hutu businessman is accused of funding militias that massacred some 800,000 Tutsis in Rwanda's 1994 genocide. His arrest paves the way for his trial at the Paris Appeal Court and later to the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Once again, Rwanda genocide suspect Félicien Kabuga has been reportedly arrested in the French capital, bringing to an end a 25-year manhunt for the 84-year-old. We will continue to keep you updated as we get more details. Moving on, a leading French virologist says there is no evidence to say COVID-19 was made in a lab. He echoed many infectious disease experts who say it most likely came from an animal.
The most possible origin of the virus is some specific fauna, which means the infection first took place through animals, then was passed on from animals to humans. Then human-to-human transmission developed. So far, that's what's happened with all viral infectious diseases. Whenever a new virus is discovered, people always assume it to be man-made, but so far, man cannot produce a pathogenic virus. No one has done it.
You're watching Africa Live here on CGTN. It's time for us to take a short break, but don't go anywhere. Here's what's coming up. The United Nations warns that some governments are using COVID-19 emergency powers to stifle dissent. And Ethiopian migrants head home after near-death experience in Mozambique.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Nigeria is my home. 160 million vibrant, ambitious individuals constantly seeking the perfect self-expression. It is these people who inspired me to be that person that is seen, to be a voice that is heard, and ultimately to be the anchor that I am. I have to tap in, tune in, and turn on the very best qualities within me to deliver the news. I'm Richard Nta, an anchor for CGTN.
Welcome back. Let's turn to China now, where President Xi Jinping has chaired a meeting on the government's work report for the past year. The gathering of the country's top leadership reviewed both the challenges and achievements with a focus on China's campaign against COVID-19. The leaders also decided prevention and control will remain a priority for the rest of the year. On the economy, China plans to adopt more proactive and flexible fiscal policies to stabilize the job market and further open up. The meeting also said China needs to meet its target of eliminating extreme poverty by the end of the year. Well, Beijing is preparing to host China's annual legislative session next week after a delay of 3 months and with some changes. The annual meetings of lawmakers and advisors, called 2 sessions, will only last a week. That's 1 week shorter than normal. Only Chinese and foreign journalists who are already in Beijing can attend, not those outside China. Briefings and interviews will mainly be conducted online. CGTN will have comprehensive coverage of the meeting starting Thursday, May the 21st. Stay tuned for that. Now, Beijing has responded to Trump's threat of cutting ties. On Thursday, while speaking to Fox News, the U.S. president blamed China over its handling of the pandemic and said he may cut off the whole relationship with China. The Chinese Foreign Ministry once again called for both sides to focus on cooperation to overcome the pandemic.
Maintaining the stable development of China-US relations is the fundamental interest of both nations. It is also beneficial to world peace and stability. At present, China and the United States should continue to strengthen anti-pandemic collaboration, overcome the situation as soon as possible, treat patients, and restore the economy. This requires the US and China to cooperate.
And staying with that story, Moscow is defending China. Russia's foreign minister says he believes Beijing did not conceal information of the outbreak from the World Health Organization.
It's necessary to find out why the virus appeared and how it spreads from human to human. Experts are studying it. It's very important for developing vaccines and controlling the pandemic. But it's not to prove who's right or who's wrong. We can't impose sanctions on one country just because the virus first appeared in one of its markets. I want to remind you that as early as late December, we learned about the outbreak from our Chinese colleagues. In January, experts discussed it under the supervision of the World Health Organization. In early February, WHO experts visited Wuhan. Those included Russian experts. Therefore, it is inaccurate to say that China hides information from the World Health Organization, or the WHO does not know the situation or retains some information.
Now, the United Nations warns that some governments are taking advantage of emergency powers imposed during the pandemic to stifle dissent. Human Rights Chief Michelle Bachelet says some countries are using lockdowns and curfews to crack down on political foes, human rights defenders, and journalists. She says the response to the pandemic should be driven by science and facts and not politics. Now, back in March, 64 migrants were found dead at the back of a truck in Mozambique. The migrants from Ethiopia were being smuggled into South Africa to work. 14 others were found alive when the truck was searched. Authorities say the dead likely suffocated in the container. Their story underpins the dangers that migrants face and why people still risk their lives to escape poverty and persecution at home. One survivor describes the horror as dozens suffocated in the back of the truck.
Crowded in a container, Degina de Gaffa says panic spread quickly. A mass of arms and legs failed out, and then a deathly silence ensued.
I
was lying on my back. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I saw was a cloudy sky, and that is how I knew that I was alive. I saw dead bodies and people standing. I realized they were the people who had traveled with me.
He was one of only 14 survivors. Rescued from the back of a truck on the Malawi-Mozambique border on the 24th of March. It took weeks before they could be repatriated to Ethiopia by the International Organization for Migration.
When we spoke to some of them, they already have friends and family in South Africa, so they were going there because of the information they've been receiving about South Africa as a country where they could work and make a good living and send money back home to their family.
Unfortunately, many never lived to see the promised land. Thuli Shabalala, CGTN.
Well, it's time for us to take a look into the day's business here on CGTN. Here's what's coming up. Zimbabwe's Reserve Bank to introduce a new set of higher denomination banknotes.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome to the business. Let's start in Zimbabwe, where the Reserve Bank there says it will introduce a new set of higher denomination banknotes to increase the amount of cash in circulation. The Apex Bank has approved the introduction of 10 and 20 Zimbabwe dollar notes, which are set to hit the market next week and the first week of June, respectively. Prior to this, the country's highest cash denomination has been the 5 Zimbabwe dollar banknote. Zimbabwe has endured a severe liquidity challenge for several years now, and efforts to inject more money into the economy have yielded inflationary outcomes. According to official figures, year-on-year inflation in the Southern African economy eclipsed the 670% mark in March this year. Well, staying in Zimbabwe, measures to prevent the spread of COVID-19 have led to the closure of many businesses in the country. Informal fruits and vegetable markets are among the hardest hit. However, some tech entrepreneurs saw an opportunity amidst the crisis and are helping vendors get customers. Here is Mahia Mutua once again with that report.
Imbare is a 2-year-old electronic vendor that delivers fruits and vegetables to your doorstep. It had registered modest growth prior to the lockdown due to a low uptake of electronic commerce here.
People have been very hesitant to onboard this e-commerce, the idea of someone else buying your vegetables for you and delivering them to you. I mean, there's various different reasons, possibly maybe because of living in a third world country. Anything that's gotten off the internet or online is sort of associated with affluence. So a lot of people feel like, oh no, this online business is probably not for my pocket. But with the lockdown, people have been forced to explore it.
The result has been the doubling of volumes that their firm handles.
We're still maintaining the 100% growth rate. Comparing this April, this is May, right? Comparing the May sales and then comparing them to the March sales this time of the month, May is definitely still much, much higher.
Another positive spin-off is the formalization of agriculture, as small farmers turn to retail outlets and distributors following the closure of the main informal vegetable markets.
Farmers would ordinarily be supplying informal markets, now supplying Fresh Grocer, which is a registered company, a registered retailer, and all of a sudden now they are more bankable and they have a better credit rating, because now they can actually, let's say they want to apply for a loan, they can actually pull up a bank statement which actually shows that they are trading with formal companies.
This isn't the only sector riding the wave. Groceries, fast food, and even bulk water can now be ordered online or via WhatsApp, signaling what could become the trend going forward.
If you look at what is being done worldwide now, you can buy whatever you want online. You can even ask for a service if you want a plumber. You go and click a service, you get a plumber. If you want an electrician, you go and click a service. There is no more need for human interaction. And as a business, that's what we have put in place. We now have more demands on web development, e-commerce platforms than ever before.
So going shopping won't require you to actually go anywhere. Paying for services won't need physical cash. Quite ideal for a country that faces shortages of both fuel and banknotes. Mahia Mutua, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Now, Kenya will not seek a debt service standstill under a G20 initiative aimed at helping poor countries weather the COVID-19 pandemic. Finance Minister Ukur Yatani says the terms of the deal do not suit Kenya's needs. The minister is also concerned about the impact that debt relief might have on Kenya's credit rating. The group of 20 major economies last month agreed to suspend payment obligations on bilateral debt owed by their least developed counterparts through the end of the year. The goal was to free up more than $20 billion that poor governments could use to support their health services.
Our actions today include a G20 initiative to suspend debt service payment for the poorest countries. All bilateral official creditors will participate in this initiative.
If we accept that position, we may now upset other engagement, other terms of loans, and there are going to be a serious cross-default clause that now will impair us from accessing markets elsewhere. Our inflow of foreign exchange has gone down. They think we may not raise enough, hard currency to make payment, but that's really not the only case. But overall, if you look at the report, the Kenyan debt sustainability analysis, we are very sustainable. Yeah. And Kenyans never defaulted. And we are, up to this time, we have adequate reserve to manage our debt payment for the next 1 year.
Turning to North Africa now, Egypt is expected to record a drop of 20% in its remittance flows this year due to COVID-19. Remittances are the second largest source of foreign currency in Egypt, and a decline could potentially affect millions in the North African nation. From Cairo, here's Adel Mahroui.
2019 saw remittances inflows reach $26.8 billion, a record high in Egypt's history. Earlier this year, January and February maintained this momentum and recorded about 37% increase in revenues during that period compared to 2019. 2020 was promising a new remittances record, but not anymore, thanks to the coronavirus pandemic.
Remittances from March to June are expected to drop by up to 20%. Their flow will not stabilize before September. The main reason is that some Egyptians have been laid off, especially those from the Gulf countries. There are those who are still abroad, but because of the pandemic are now in between jobs, and finally there are those whose salaries have been cut.
The World Bank estimates a 19.7% global drop in remittances this year. Gulf countries are the biggest contributors to Egypt's remittances revenues. So combining the impact of COVID-19 with the drop in oil prices, Egypt could be on the higher end of that estimate.
I think the expected drop in remittances is one of the reasons that has pushed the government towards IMF loans. It's a precautionary move taken to cushion the economy, especially now that there are no precise projections to when this pandemic's impact will be over.
Remittances in 2019 brought 5 times more foreign exchange to the North African country than the Suez Canal, and also more than twice the revenues from tourism. It's almost as high as Egypt's entire exports, which reached 28 billion last year. It represents 9 to 10% of the gross domestic product. The drop in remittances this year could put millions of Egyptians under financial pressure. So far, the pandemic has consumed about $9 billion of Egypt's foreign reserves, so the government might not have much to do to help them out. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Ras Sidr, Egypt.
Now, the COVID-19 crisis has changed the way businesses around the world are being run, with lockdowns and social distancing forcing many to work from home. In Uganda, real estate developers have raised concerns about the long-term damage it could do to the sector. There are warnings of a severe drop in sales and occupancy, particularly in terms of office space. Isabel Nakiria reports.
Virtual workspaces are becoming the new norm, but the shift to online instead of office is having a knock-on effect. Real estate managers say occupancy in commercial buildings is dropping as businesses adapt to new ways of operating amid COVID-19, while property owners are finding they are unable to collect rents.
Especially people in the commercial environment, they are going to face some challenges because offices are going to be a bit digital. People are realizing that actually you can work from home and still be able to operate. People are going to downsize spaces in view of cutting the overheads in terms of rent.
Even as countries begin to ease lockdowns, growth in the sector could be slow. Developers foresee a drop in business expansion and new spaces to let.
This is a time when many businesses are not going to be looking to expand, but rather to sit down and practice financial resilience to see if they can ride out the storm and try and stabilize cash flows. So I don't think we're going to see a lot of letting activity.
Property agencies say many estate developers are struggling to finance bank loans, and the lockdown will stress them even more.
The underutilization of space in offices as a result of social distancing is also going to have an impact on profitability and profit margins, and eventually capital values. And it is going to stress businesses, because where you had, say, 115 or 100 members of staff, now you can only have 40.
This growth has been eminently attacked, and a massive slackdown is being witnessed ever since the outbreak of the pandemic. It's evident that the immediate impact has been a severe drop in real estate transactions. Despite the government easing on lockdown restrictions, developers remain uncertain on when business will pick up or rents paid. Economists predict hard times ahead for the sector, and it could take long for things to get back to what they were before COVID-19. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN Kampala, Uganda.
Now, China says its economy is recovering but still faces many challenges as COVID-19 spreads globally. Data from the National Bureau of Statistics shows that the country's value-added industrial output was up nearly 4% year-on-year in April. The job market remained generally stable, with the urban unemployment rate just 0.1% higher than in March. Consumer spending recovered somewhat, with a 7.5% year-on-year fall last month. That is compared with a drop of nearly 16% in March. Well, in the meantime, Chinese officials say that the country's foreign trade will face continued pressure in the second quarter from the COVID-19 pandemic. That is despite a slight upturn in the numbers. CGTN's Mahia with the details.
Official data on Friday show a year-on-year increase of 8.2% of China's commodity export in April. But spokesperson from China's statistics authorities warns repeatedly at a press conference not to be overly optimistic about trade recovery, since producer price index for April has decreased by 3.1%, doubling February's drop in percentage points.
Structurally speaking, the downside is due to imported risks. For example, global crude oil prices have taken a dive of 70% in April, compared to the highest point this year. Such fluctuation in global crude markets will affect oil-related industries, which then hurts the overall economic indicators.
When asked whether China is capable of guaranteeing a 6% GDP growth in 2020, the official didn't answer directly, but said it's hard for one country to maintain its status while the world economy is in contraction.
China's exports are facing great challenges. Although there was a positive year-on-year growth of 8.2% in April, I don't think we should be overly positive of the economic prospect in the near future. We need to focus on our economic strength, dig up consumption potential, and support small-sized businesses in order to weather through the pandemic.
Global economic institutes have painted a gloomy picture for 2020's economic growth, despite many countries setting forward plans to lift lockdowns and reopen trades.
But the coronavirus crisis raises longer-term concerns as well. The record shows that deeper and longer recessions can leave behind lasting damage to the productive capacity of the economy. We are seeing a severe decline in economic activity, and already the job gains of the last decade have been erased.
Powell's two colleagues, U.S. Dallas and Minneapolis Federal Reserve Presidents Robert Kaplan and Neil Kashkari, were more direct in saying that an earlier predicted V-shaped recovery, where the big downturn is matched by a violent upswing, is highly unlikely. Mahia, CGTN, Beijing.
The United States is again extending the reprieve for Chinese tech giant Huawei to buy from U.S. tech companies to August 13th. That is the fourth extension of the original 90-day reprieve. On Wednesday, U.S. President Donald Trump also extended the executive order which bars U.S. companies from working with or using telecommunications equipment made by firms that the White House considers to be a national security risk. The presidential order was first signed in May 2019. It effectively cuts companies like Huawei out of the U.S. market, while also preventing it from working with U.S. companies like Google. Well, it's time for us to take another short break. Here's what's coming up. South African DJ spins for COVID-19 relief. We have the details after the break.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Let's head to South Africa now, where internationally acclaimed DJ and music producer Black Coffee has raised thousands of dollars towards helping feed citizens who are hungry and in need during the coronavirus pandemic. Tuli Shabalala has that story.
He is one of South Africa's biggest musical export. Nkosinathi Innocent Maphumulo, whose stage name is Black Coffee, is known to blend classic electronic house music with other influences like jazz. He entertains millions of people in dance clubs all over the globe. Now he is using his love for music to reach those in need during the coronavirus pandemic.
I had a bigger dream of at least raising R1 million, and I think we may at least raise 600,000. I take that as a big win, and just outside that, I think I kind of like how expose these entities to a crowd, you know, that it wasn't there before.
The popular DJ launched his Corona Care fundraiser in April. He keeps his followers entertained with live streams of his performances on social media pages. Black Coffee has raised over $5,000 so far and aims to double those digits. The funds will go to the millions left without food in South Africa during its coronavirus lockdown.
It's been quite an amazing journey. You know, it's been so nice playing music comfortably, you know, knowing that people every weekend they were tuning in. We had like really, really solid numbers every time we were streaming. And I think tomorrow I'm going to play a little bit more, maybe like for an hour and a half, because it's the last one. And then I just need to kind of like go back to my drawing board now as an artist and see how to really create opportunities, you know, now next time I stream it, you know, to make sure that we earn some money.
Under global lockdowns and air travel bans, live gigs have dried up.
We perform for crowds, and crowds is a no-no. I'm not talking just local, international too. Like, it's going to take a while for the health people to allow 1,000 people in a room. It doesn't matter what country, you know, and 1,000 people in the room means good business for the person who's doing the party. So if you're saying 80 people in the room, no one's going to make a party for 80 people, even though it's possible, but no one is because there's no money to be made.
It's going to take a while until DJs are filling up their usual spots. But for now, we can keep dancing to their music in our living rooms until the pandemic is over. Tuli Shabalala, CGTN.
And here's what's coming up on Africa Live Sports. Tokyo Games Organizing Committee not sure how money from the IOC will be used.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, let's kick off in Japan, where Tokyo Olympic organizers say they are not privy to how the International Olympic Committee plans on spending money set aside for the postponed games. The organizing committee's CEO, Toshiro Muto, also added the talks were still underway as to how much the games postponement would additionally cost Japanese stakeholders. IOC President Thomas Bach announced his organization expects to bear costs of up to $800 million for its part in the reorganization of the Games, which were postponed to next year. The IOC and the Japanese government jointly took the decision in March to postpone the Olympics due to the coronavirus outbreak, the first time in history that the Games have been delayed.
As to the breakdown on how this money might be used, I understand that the IOC has stated it is too soon and too early to tell. We in the organizing committee ourselves have no idea about how this money will be spent. As to why it is $650 million, I am afraid you will have to ask the IOC.
Now, Henry Schoeman claimed South Africa's first ever medal in the triathlon at the 2016 Olympic Games in Rio. 4 years on after his victory at the 2018 gold